Thank you for your loving hands, your loving heart, your loving ways. Thank you for the gifts you bring into the world each day. And if you ever doubt yourself, remember us who love you well. We know all the gifts you bring into the world each day. So thank you for your loving hands, your loving heart. So thank you for your loving hands, your loving heart, your loving ways, your loving ways. The gifts you bring. Thank you for the gifts you bring into the world each day.
So we're going to show this. It's a 6 or 7 minute slideshow that just kind of orients you as to where Nepal is, where the earthquake was, and some of the images of before and after. And then we're going to have Jennifer and Ryan speak about what their experiences were.
Nepal, just as tourists, we were trekking in the Manaslu region, which is just to the east of the Annapurna region. It's a little bit more known, but it's a big circuit trek. We would hike up into the high Himalayas, and we were close to the end of the trek, actually, where we rejoined with the Annapurna circuit trek, and we're kind of getting back into the more developed parts of the country during the earthquake. We were actually separated, which was pretty common on our trekking days. Is my girlfriend Sarah and I would usually get a little bit ahead with one of our guides, and then Jennifer and our other guide would kind of hang back and enjoy the sights a little bit different. So for me, when we were nearly to our destination village for the day, which is a little town by the name of Tal. It's T-A-L, and we were within sight, actually. We had just come around a corner and were planning to take some photos of this really lovely little village when I noticed a pretty significant rock fall coming down the mountain ahead of us. And you know, we'd seen plenty of rock fall during the trip, so I didn't think much of it other than it was particularly big. But then when I turned back around, I saw another rock fall kind of behind us, and before I knew it, there were rocks falling in all directions. The trail that we were on was sort of just built into the side of a mountain, kind of like if anybody's been to Glacier National Park and hiked on the Highline Trail. Kind of like the first part of that, where it's just kind of blasted into the cliff. That's about what we were on. So as far as anywhere to go for shelter, we kind of just had to hug the wall as best we could and hope that the rocks didn't hit us, which obviously they didn't, since I'm still here. But that was our experience, was just kind of weathering it and waiting for the rocks to stop falling. And once they did, we gave it a few minutes to wait and see if there was going to be an immediate aftershock, and then sort of sprinted from relative safety of rock outcrop to rock outcrop until we were in the town. And it was, I mean, we were so close, it was maybe only about a 5-minute walk. And then the village itself of Tal was built in the floodplain down in the very river bottom, and so you could actually get away from the canyon walls and away from some of that immediate danger.
500-foot drop off to the river. Here's the road curving around, and here's a 500-foot cliff, which of course goes up to the mountains. So it's, you know, going on this road. And I was actually at the side of the road, kind of going like this, going to take a picture of the Mirjandi, turquoise, beautiful water. And the ground started shaking. I moved back, and I thought, this must be an earthquake. And I just happened to fall into a group of Japanese elders, 15 Japanese, like 70 to 80-year-olds, who had also done the Manaslu trek. I saw them on the Budi Gandaki. And so I recognized them, and so our guide and their guide, so 4 Nepalese porters and 15 Japanese. I was in great company. I was so happy to be with Japanese, of course, have many earthquakes, and I just felt so comfortable and really blessed to be with them, and 4 Nepalese guides, 2 of which did this to the rocks. Rock nose, which means stay rock. So I knew that they had power. So I was just really happy to be with the people that I happened to end up with. And so we stayed together, kind of ran together. We're in a flat area together, weathering out the earthquake for however long it took. Ran a little bit together and just stayed together till we got to Tal. And we took the safe bridge, and you all took the more rocky suspension bridge. So that was my experience. We had kind of different experiences.
I remember when we crossed that suspension bridge, which was a few minutes before the earthquake, noticing that there were all these dents and stuff where rocks had hit it in the past, and thinking, boy, this would be a horrible place to be if the rocks started falling down the mountain. So we were glad to be past that spot. And so yeah, it took maybe a half hour or more before our whole group kind of was able to come together. So that was a kind of frightening little moment of just uncertainty. The immediate area there around Tal, the biggest issue I think is mostly the rockfall. The town normally has electricity and water supply, but a rather large slab broken off and fallen directly onto their electrical and water pipes. So there was none of that there that evening. As far as buildings and structures and stuff immediately damaged, Tal wasn't too bad. I think it's a fairly new town. Something you noticed as you went is different types of construction tended to weather the earthquake better. So there were some of the older, stacked stone style houses, like in the slideshow you saw the traditional farmhouse, I think it was labeled. And that's a pretty traditional building method in a lot of the villages. They don't have access to a ton of other building materials, and so they take the flat rocks and they build them up with wooden door frames and window frames. And it's actually pretty sturdy, but it doesn't hold up very well to that kind of lateral shaking, which is why in a lot of villages there's significant structural damage, but maybe not as many fatalities and injuries as the amount of destruction in the village might indicate. It's very fortunate for everyone that the earthquake occurred around noon, so most people were out of their homes, outside already. I think if it had been in the middle of the night, it could have been even more disastrous. Also, for most places, it was fortunate it was a Saturday also, because I know a lot of schools collapsed. One that we had just seen in Darapani not an hour earlier, we were saddened to hear had collapsed. But being Saturday, all the kids were out of school, so that was good as well.
And something about the culture, everybody works and lives outside. So if it's a sunny day or any kind of non-rainy day, everybody's outside working. They're drying beans, they're in the fields. So there's some fortunate pieces to the day. Yeah, question?
Could you tell about driving back into Kathmandu and just what you saw as you got closer and closer to Kathmandu, where you were?
Yeah, where I was, which right after the trek, I went up to Galigon, which is a village where I lived 7 years ago, and I visited my Nepalese family for a week. So that was my plan, and I kind of went, kept going with my own plan and said bye to Ryan and Sarah. So I was kind of almost, when I came back to Kathmandu, it was actually 2 weeks after the earthquake. And so I probably had a different experience than Ryan. But I saw on the roads going from Pokhara to Kathmandu on the bus, definitely there was a change where I started to see the older buildings. It's all the older ones. It's the historic buildings. It's the clay buildings collapsed in on themselves or look like they're bombed out. That's from the shaking and the earthquake. So I started to see that, and that was pretty powerful. I started to see tents. This is the road, and this is the tent where people are living by the side of the road. So people were camping out wherever there was a flat place, and there's not too many flat places. And so a lot of tents, a lot of collapsed older homes, a lot of traffic. I saw relief trucks, which I was very glad, mostly from India. Those are some of the things I saw.
Yeah, so we returned to Kathmandu much earlier, and it was, I'm trying to think exactly what it would have been, maybe. Oh, I'm sorry. It was about 3 days, I want to say, after the main quake, maybe 4, that we returned to Kathmandu via bus. And that was an interesting experience because we felt kind of ominous because we were one of very few vehicles going to Kathmandu, but going the other way, there was an incredible exodus of people. According to the local news that we were able to have access to there, over 350,000 people fled in those first few days from Kathmandu. And I think it was pretty much anyone who had family elsewhere that either they needed to check on or that they could just go stay with was leaving if they had the means to. The government had organized buses, a free bus system for folks to get out of there, anticipating like 5,000 people to show up, and then I think 20,000 people showed up looking for a ride, which led to a little bit of civil unrest at that time. But I mean, for the most part, everything was fairly orderly. They had lifted their normal rule against people riding on tops of buses in the Kathmandu Valley, and so you saw these buses stacked to as high as they could possibly be with people, which made them kind of terrifying to see coming the other way, because they were definitely pushing down on the springs quite a bit, and maybe didn't have the best control. But people were fleeing the capital in massive numbers, and I honestly don't blame them, because so many buildings, whether or not they're actually collapsed, like if your building collapsed, you kind of know where you stand with it, but so many buildings there are damaged. And, you know, it's very subtle as you walk around in Kathmandu, and you'll start to look and you'll notice a lot of buildings have cracks running up them, you know, little pieces sort of cracking apart, and so a lot of folks were just not comfortable returning to their homes, and so they're all living in what few open spaces there are there in Kathmandu, in sort of like tent cities, which then in turn was one of the first foci of a lot of the aid groups that were getting bottlenecked there in Kathmandu, was providing public health to these tent cities, because I mean there was not a whole lot of availability of like latrines and water and food and stuff for these people. And so I honestly, knowing that, I don't blame anybody if they had a place to go to head somewhere else to kind of wait this out.
Sanitation.
Oh, well, yeah, this is kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but really thinking about what people need, and my experience of living in a Nepalese village was, well, and this is my experience of being in the village, is that I got sick there this time. I got this that kind of flu and deep cough that half of the Nepalese population has, and I'm really careful about sanitizing my hands. And my family has a concrete latrine. It's all new. I got sick within 2 days. My Nepalese mother was sick. I was sick. That's because everyone lives in such close proximity there. I mean, to tell you a little bit about the house, my family's house was, the kitchen is twice as big as this table. Sometimes there would be 10 people. Around the fire is in the clay earth in the ground in the kitchen, about this big. And they cook for 10 people on that fire. And so, you know, we're all around, and disease has a way of spreading really easily. You live so close to people. So if you think about the villages, you've seen the pictures in Gorkha and those districts that are east of Kathmandu. I mean, I'm just worried mostly. They are getting some rice and they are getting some provisions now, but what about down the road? What about sanitation? What about when the monsoons come? They're gonna come. The particular flower is out there, that the monsoons come after this flower blooms. They're coming really soon, within 2 weeks. What's that gonna be for people living in tents and even closer proximity? So that's a concern of mine, is sanitation, because I experienced how easy it was to get sick in a relatively intact, stable village, fairly sanitized situation. It's a real concern, disease spreading. So I think, shelter. Another thing is, and this is not in the news, but there are sexual abuse cases happening in the tents and the areas where people have to go to. This is a segmented society. Women and young teenagers, they're not used to living close to their elder brother, cousin. And so that is happening, and that's documented from a friend of mine who worked with Global, I can't remember the organization, Global Women, anyway. She worked with them passing out sanitized pads to women in the camps. So, there's needs, and there's a lot of hidden needs that we don't even think about. And the whole structure of the society is changing. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to fathom that much change. So those are some needs that I see and I experience and I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I think that as we sort of, Valerie sort of touched on in the introductions, our focus, or at least the focus of tonight's fundraiser, and what we've been kind of thinking the most about are some of the getting things distributed to more remote areas. As you can imagine, the logistics in Nepal, even under the best of conditions, are pretty difficult to work with. You know, many of the villages that are badly hit that we've visited are accessible normally by a couple days of walking only. I mean, even helicopters, you can drop stuff nearby, but often there's not even a place to land a helicopter. They are on such steep terrain. And so, in some cases, even walking for most people is not an option because landslides have run across these, you know, limited access trails and roads, and so some of them are being accessed by people walking, but I mean it takes, you know, some like mountaineering skills to actually bring things to these villages, and so that's going to limit the amount of load that a single person can carry. It's going to kind of take away the options that are normally used, like mule trains and stuff like that. And so getting things distributed around the country is incredibly difficult. And so some of the ways that we're trying to sort of get around that is by going through individuals that we know on the ground in Nepal. I know that the owner of the trekking company that we went with, Crystal Mountain, he's done, I think he's on his second run right now of just going out with tarps, food, and medical supplies, hiring as many people as he can trust to get through these areas and throwing it on their backs and just taking it to the villages. And it's kind of little micro treks like that that is the only practical way to move some of the needs that are out there. And so by having someone on the ground that you can kind of direct the money to individually, and then they can use it to hire these small scale things and just sort of get to villages 2 or 3 at a time, but that is not really a more efficient way, unfortunately, to do these things. Especially, I know that there's an incredible lack of helicopters, or at least there was when I was there. Like there's
About 20 helicopters.
20, I think they were saying 30 something when I was there, so it's even down. I mean, it's almost shocking how few helicopters they have access to, you know, for those alternative means, and those are almost exclusively probably being used for rescue operations at this point still. Because they're still digging people out. There's people that are stranded who are traveling, and so that as an option is not even on the table.
So I wanted to talk about a hopeful thing. Like as Ryan said, the trekking companies are really good at getting supplies, and I know 2 trekking companies, ours, Crystal Mountain, and they're on their second mission. And the first mission, Jalwant's mission, was to go to Singla, and some of you have heard of Singla, Nepal, because I sent out an email fundraiser from Nepal with Jeff's help, and that was particularly for that village, raising funds for that village. Well, Jalwant, he was successful at getting the rice and tarps and other supplies to Singla. And I mean, this was like 5 or 6 days after the earthquake, which is pretty phenomenal for where it was. It's off of the Manaslu track.
If it was ideal conditions, it would be a 2-day walk from the nearest road at least, and that's for a Nepali person. For us, it would probably be maybe 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. So he was successful at that, and he has gone on to the second mission, which is some high Tibetan villages on the Manaslu tracks, which includes Samdo and Samagon and Lo, and I'm forgetting a few of them, but those villages up there that are really pure Tibetan heritage. Closer to Tibet, to the border of Tibet, than getting to Kathmandu. And so that's happening, that the trekking companies are going up and getting to some of these places. And another very positive thing, because I was just in Kathmandu my last 2 days, and the last day I met 10 groups of young people working in various places in Nepal. And it's the young people in Nepal who have family in villages who are organizing on the ground, and they know how to get to the villages, and they know how to do the computer work and the fundraising. So they're doing fundraising for their villages. And I can, I know a few of these sites I can pass on to you, that I met people who are doing this. So I think the young people really, as one woman said to me, we're sitting and waiting for someone to come to her office. We're sitting under a tree. She said, this is the time for young people in Nepal to help. They need to like move bricks, move the rubble, start doing something. And I really saw this. I mean, the young people who are very savvy, they've been to university, engineering degrees, they're on their computers, and they're organizing for their particular villages, and they know how to get there. I say, oh, this is something hopeful happening. They're the ones that know how to do this, and I want to fund them. Yeah. So.
Could you talk about the prejudice towards Tibetan peoples?
Yeah, Jan, you want to say something?
Well, you know, I was interested in the picture of the earth with the
Make
bags.
sure everybody can,
Oh, yeah, Valerie can see.
That is so cool. And I was just wondering, where were the bags made? Were they made there? You know,
This is a website that we're looking into right now, Earth Bags. I've contacted them. My friend Luke, who lives in Kathmandu and runs the Padma Foundation, sent it to me initially, and it's something we're looking at, and we're looking at that for maybe in November as being part of our service trip. It's a pretty, my husband also was looking into it. We're kind of analyzing the pricing. It seems pretty simple. It's rice bags, plastic rice bags. They're uniformly filled with rubble, and then they're stacked, and then chicken wire to hold them, and then stucco or, you know, and a dirt floor. Now, the 11 buildings that were already built in Nepal in that model have survived the earthquake. So it's it looks like a sustainable building for the area, something that can be done cheaply with what they have. And there's a workshop in California that we're looking into, $200 for a weekend workshop to learn how to build it, and that's something we're looking at for November, but I'm not sure what November looks like. You know, if we could go into 3 or 4 villages as teams and get one built, show them how to do it, like build a school, build a clinic, and then they can take the technology because they have the materials. So,
Jennifer, could you speak about discrimination
Oh.
that you saw, witnessed?
Yes, and you know, Nepal is overall a very tolerant and really peace-loving people, but there is definitely some subtle discrimination going on, mostly by the government towards the Tibetan people. Very hard. I can tell a personal story, which would take a little long, about a woman trying to get a visa. The who do you call it? The person who gives out the visa. I don't know.
consulate.
Huh?
The consulate?
The consulate said, "Oh, I'm not going to give you a visa today. I just don't feel like it." You know, I mean, really blowing her off. He said, "Come back tomorrow. You have to pay all the fees." The fees to get a visa are, you know, only once in a lifetime for most people, and it's a donation. I mean, it's really that's just one story I heard, but you cannot send clothes to any of the Tibetan refugee camps in Nepal because the post office charges the Tibetan people for any clothes they receive. So these kinds of things go on, and they are what the Tibetan people live with on a daily basis. Now, those 2 examples are really from the government. I think the Nepalese people overall are very tolerant of each other. Those are a few examples, Jeff.
Thank you for your loving hands, your loving heart, your loving way.